Yep, we're starting things off with another unboxing today. And today's game is Assault Rigs. This is a game I actually originally played on DOS, even though I only had the demo version, but I do actually own the PlayStation version of this as well. And this is where things get interesting, because I'm not really sure which came first, whether this came out on DOS first or whether this came out on the PlayStation first. Like, I mean, you see on the box, it's like offering free PC gamer subscriptions, and it's also noticing that it's 8-player multiplayer, like the PlayStation can't do that. And even on the back of the box, you can see that there's a Q-Sound logo at the bottom there. It might be upside down for you people, but it's weird finding good recording positions. But in any case, this is actually a sealed box. So we are going to open this together and find out what is inside. So let's get started with that. You can hear stuff moving around inside. There's definitely more than just a CD in here. Stubborn shrink wrap. Pretty sure it's the original shrink wrap too, because I did look it over. There we go. No idea what we're gonna find inside here. Look at that. Trying to keep it in camera. It's a very weird camera angle that I'm at right now, so. Okay, shrink wrap is off. Box opens up here. It's actually stuck really well. Yeah, it's I'm trying to do this without damaging the box. I'm gonna have trouble with that. It doesn't want to open. There it goes. Okay, good enough. Oh wow! And now this part's stuck inside. Okay. That is super tightly in there. Wow, that's actually quite the corrugation on that cardboard. Well, it's got a little thing here. So, what goodies do we have? Oh, there's actually a lot of stuff in there. Okay, so we've got the CD itself, which is itself shrink wrapped, which is kind of interesting. Huh. Because, like, I mean, the CD itself is shrink wrapped, and yet it doesn't have, like, any inserts or anything in it, so why would you go through the hassle? And then we also have an instruction manual, which is pretty important. Probably upside down. There we go, instruction manual. Let's see if the instruction manual is actually in color. It doesn't feel it. Nope, instruction manual is definitely black and white. And then what else have we got in here? It says feed the machine. Yeah, no kidding. Plus, you make your manual black and white, but you make your advertising color. Yeah, this is advertising for other Psygnosis titles, because this is a Psygnosis game. Yeah, it's not particularly saying which ones are PlayStation, which ones are PC, just that it's PlayStation and PC. Okay then. And then, what else? Here's the PC Gamer offer. 3 for free. So 3 PC Gamer mags for free would be the offer there. Sony Interactive. Oh right, because Psygnosis was a Sony company. See, that's why it gets confusing. Like, was this originally DOS? Was this originally PlayStation? I don't know. Like, there's the Sony registration card right there. What the heck is this? What? Is this an advertising supplement to PC Gamer? It says that right at the bottom here. So this is like some sort of PC Gamer mini magazine? Well, specifically for Yeah, specifically for for the Psygnosis software here. That is pretty interesting. Like, this feels like magazine paper. This feels very flimsy, like, but it's stapled together too, in 2 spots no less. There you go. Even more advertising, because the one insert wasn't enough. We had to get like a mini magazine at the same time. Okay, so that's actually a lot of stuff in that box. Notwithstanding this really freaking... This is super thick cardboard. Might actually be useful. But anyways, let's actually check out the game itself. So in terms of the game itself, it's actually surprisingly good, once you know how to play it and adapt to its quirks. Now, I've played a lot of games which aren't as good as this one, yet somehow managed to get better reviews, and I think the main issue was that this game simply set the wrong expectations. To give an example of what I mean, right now as you're watching this, you're probably thinking these graphics look extremely basic and that there's not really much creativity going on. But then, take a look at this introductory sequence. The stuttering movement aside, remember that this is mid-90s 3D here, and it actually looks half decent. Not to mention, look at how the rest of this sequence plays out. I mean, if the game looked like this, with high-res glowing vector lines and even more Tron inspiration, I think people would have been way more accepting of it. In fact, it may be hard to tell, but everything shown in this intro sequence is stuff that can happen in the game itself. Just, instead of looking all VR and awesome, it, well, looks like this. The funny thing is, that's not the worst of it. You don't have to get very far into this game when all of a sudden the Tron inspiration disappears, and instead it's now military themed. In fact, most of the game takes place in the non-Tron inspired levels. So right away, the graphics have scared off most people by not appealing properly to anyone, either by missing expectations with the glowing vector line style, or by breaking management of those expectations by changing the style completely further in. Couple that with decent, albeit unusual music choices, one of the worst default camera angles possible, and some curious game mechanics on top of that, which make perfect sense but don't feel right being used in a game, and it stops being surprising as to why this didn't do so well. But it's still fun to play.
Great shot!
Assault Rigs was developed and published by Psygnosis in 1996 for both the PlayStation and DOS PCs, with the Saturn port following a year and a half later, and it's best described as a 1 to 8 player action game. Now, for the longest time, I thought the DOS version was a port of the PlayStation version, but now that I own both of them and can see the file dates and everything, it's actually safer to say that they were both developed alongside each other, as the PlayStation version and PC versions are almost identical, save for some very minor differences, and they have file dates which are very close to each other. It's also pertinent to note that while the PC version supports typical networked and modem-based multiplayer, the PlayStation version still retains some multiplayer capabilities, despite there not being a split-screen mode. Rather, instead, it supported the console linking feature that the original PlayStation had, where you could link 2 consoles together, both running a copy of the game on their own TVs, and play multiplayer in that manner. It primarily runs in a VGA 320x200 256 color graphics mode, even though it supports SVGA 640x480 256 color graphics for video playback, as it uses pre-rendered videos for the intro sequence, game over sequences, and a short victory sequence if you clear the final level. Why the game lacks SVGA support for the actual gameplay? I don't know. Granted, this game does not use hardware acceleration on the PC side of things, and not by default anyways, as I believe there was at least one release for a specific hardware accelerator that was out at the time, but even on period-specific hardware with a typical graphics card, this game functioned at a reasonable frame rate on 486 systems and a very good frame rate on Pentiums. As for audio, it only supports the Gravis Ultrasound and Sound Blaster cards, though all the music is contained on CD audio tracks. As for its current release date, it never saw a digital re-release. In fact, most Psygnosis software never has, unfortunately. But thankfully, this is a pretty common and inexpensive game to come across, with most copies running under $10 if they're loose, or only as high as $25 for a brand new sealed copy just like mine. The only trick is that it's way easier to source the PlayStation and Saturn releases, as the DOS copy is much more rare. But due to the low demand, it's not any more expensive than the console versions, so just keep your eyes peeled and you're sure to find the one you want. Though, if you're just looking to play the game and don't care which version you get, the PlayStation version is so closely the same as the DOS version that it's also a good one to go with. As for the Saturn version though, I have no experience with it, so I have no idea how well it plays by comparison. Now, before we even start playing this thing, we're already running into some quirks, which can make just starting a new game feel weird. When you go to start a new game, you're not simply dropped straight into the action. Instead, you first have to choose between level select and password. Now, this is something that probably confused a lot of players, because if you only just started playing, you can only select the first level through the level select. But then at the same time, why do you need to save your progress to a memory card on the PlayStation when you could just use passwords? So yeah, the level select feature is for people who have a memory card on the PlayStation side of things and want to save their progress, whereas on the PC side of things, this is all automatic. But there's also a password system in case you don't want to use a memory card on the PlayStation, or want to skip ahead to places you haven't been to yet in either version. Also, I should point out that the high score table tracks scores per level and also acts as a level select itself. Thus, when you select a high score, you're taken straight into the level that score was for. Well, I say straight in, but anytime you start playing the game, regardless of what level you start from, you have to choose which assault rig you want to pilot from 3 choices. The armored unit, which is slow but can take a ton of hits before being destroyed. The swift unit, which is the opposite, with a very high top speed but goes down only a few hits, and the hybrid unit, which is balanced between those two extremes. It's also important to note that the swift unit does not have a swivel turret. Now, you can't manually swivel your turret, so the only time this matters is if you find an auto turret power-up, which automatically aims your turret towards nearby enemies, as this power-up doesn't work with the swift unit. Now we're finally dropped into the game, and right off the bat, press F1. The default camera angle is atrocious, as it fills half the screen with your tank, making it hard to see what you're doing. And the second camera angle is a third-person view that's actually extremely suitable, and it's the one I recommend sticking with for most players. The third camera angle is used to help get your bearings, as it always faces the same direction regardless of where your rig is facing. The fourth camera angle is an overhead view, which can help line yourself up for moving platforms. While the fifth and final camera angle is a first-person view, which is also very playable and a good one to go with if you prefer first-person over third-person, though it's harder to see your surroundings. The goal of the game is simple: collect all the gems in the level to open the exit, then make your way through the exit. Now, it sounds simple, but throughout each level you'll have enemies trying to stop you and various kinds of environmental puzzles to trip you up, including pushable blocks that you can also drive your rig over top of, moving platforms, electric barriers, landmines, fake walls that you can drive through. Heck, just the level design itself can sometimes be maze-like or filled with tricky things to maneuver through or around. Actually, because there's a lot of narrow passages in many of the levels, you're going to find yourself cursing the physics in this game before too long, as your rig constantly ends up getting turned around in ways you didn't intend. The funny thing there is that there's a reason for this, and it has to do with the physics model actually being pretty accurate. See, here's what's happening. When you move up against a wall in virtually any other game, you simply slide along the wall, or in a poorly programmed game, the wall would just stop you dead in your tracks. However, here in Assault Rigs, when you run up against a wall at an angle, the physics continues to carry the momentum of your rig, meaning even though the front end has slammed into the wall, the back end still has momentum and continues to carry that as it pushes your rig against the wall, ultimately causing you to align flat with the wall. This isn't a bug, this isn't technically poor physics, this is very much intentional and something you need to get used to if you're going to make it anywhere in this game. The unfortunate part is that, even though it makes perfect sense, it's not really a good game mechanic. Still, this means if you want to keep solid control over your rig, it's best not to get too fancy near the walls, and to actually stay clear of the walls when you're in a fight, so as not to end up slamming into them and screwing up where you're aiming. And actually, once you realize the game is doing this, you can take advantage of it. By sliding right into the side of a wall, you'll end up perfectly aligned to look down a narrow passage, meaning you can fire your guns down the entire length of that passage with minimal effort, destroying anything which happens to be in the way. One other control tip I have, since it's so important for playing this game, is to keep your turning and sliding controls on separate hands. Well, if you're playing on the PlayStation, the sliding controls would be on the shoulder button, so that's not a big deal. But on the PC, the joystick controls are a joke, so you're likely going to be playing with the keyboard instead, as there's no mouse controls. So to that end, having the turning controls on one hand and the sliding controls on the other makes it way easier to perform advanced moves, like circling around an enemy while you lay into them with your weapons. There's also a fine adjustment button, which when held down reduces the sensitivity of your turning controls, and a braking button, which helps to hold you in place on inclines and makes you move much more slowly, allowing you to get onto moving platforms more easily. The button for your brakes also doubles as a flip button, in case your rig gets flipped over and you need to flip it up right again. You're also going to come across numerous weapons and power-ups while traversing these arenas. Now each time you collect a weapon, you're loaded up to the maximum number of shots that you're allowed to have for it, whereas with power-ups, you always collect an extra one, and I don't believe there's any maximums for them, though I might be wrong about that. Now, each weapon also has a unique targeting reticle in the first-person view if you happen to be playing the game that way. Now, all of the weapons are pretty straightforward to use, though the guided missiles require you to manually take control of the missile until it hits something. Actually, the guided missiles are a great way to investigate the level and get an idea of where everything is. And just keep in mind they'll explode if they try to cross the boundaries of the level, and that includes any of the invisible walls. Now, most of the power-ups you find only have limited usefulness, but they all have very generous time limits. For instance, there's a shield power-up which makes you immune to all damage, which lasts for a whopping 45 seconds. To put that in perspective, it's possible to drive from one corner of most levels to the other corner in about 6 or 7 seconds if you've got a straight path. So 45 seconds of complete invulnerability is almost too good. Though given the maze-like nature of some of the levels, you may end up needing all of that extra time to begin with, especially when things start to respawn. So that's one thing that's really important to keep in mind. Everything respawns, except the gems. If you collect a weapon, it'll be back a little later and you can collect it again. If you destroy an enemy, it'll come back a while later. If some landmines get destroyed, they too will come back, provided they were actually a part of the level and not dropped by a mine-laying enemy. Now, this may sound annoying, but it's part of the reason why the game's keeping score. Most people playing this game for the first time are just going to try the approach of surviving the levels as best as they can to make it through all of them. But having a high score system and having everything respawn over time adds challenge for anyone who wants to try and maximize their scores, especially given the time limits. Actually, we need to talk about that time limit for a moment because it can serve as a point of severe frustration for new players. Now, you actually have unlimited lives in this game, technically. If you die, you're asked if you wish to continue, and doing so resets the level right back to its initial state, including the time limit. There's even a restart option in the pause menu, so you can restart the level anytime you want. However, if that time limit expires, it's an immediate game over. No continue screen, no asking to restart, straight to game over, and then straight back to the main menu, or high score table, depending on if you made any high scores during your run. Now, you might be thinking at first that it's kind of a dumb thing for the game to do that, given that there's continues and restarts available, and it still kind of is, because, at least on the PlayStation side of things, you have to deal with loading times. But remember that you can level select up to whatever point you've made it to, and that scores are only tracked per level, being reset if you ever continue or restart. So the only thing getting a game over does, really, is force you to level select back to where you were and select your rig again. It's really just a quirky thing, but because of how it's presented, it almost feels player hostile, because let's face it, it kinda is. Fortunately, if you know you're not gonna make the time limit and don't want to go through all of that, you can just pause and restart the level before the time runs out. The last thing to quickly mention is that you may have noticed the image of your rig in the bottom corner with the colored quads around it. Now, this is your rig's primary shielding, which absorbs damage. It's actually tracked for 4 different sides of your rig, going from green to yellow to red to black, with black indicating that a single hit on that side of your rig will destroy you. Now, because of how this works, and because of how the AI works, it's important to take advantage of this. For instance, if you have to traverse a moving platform and know that you might be attacked in the process, you can turn your rig so that one of your stronger shield quadrants is facing the direction you're likely to be attacked from, thus maximizing how much damage you can sustain before being destroyed. So in reference to assault rigs, one of my Patreon supporters, Alex, asked what other games I'd compare it to. But quite frankly, as you've all seen, it's hard to draw direct comparisons, even though overall, assault rigs has a very generic feel on the surface. But it's not generic, it's very quirky with its own personality, and probably would have done much better had it not set everyone's graphical expectations too high right from the start, at a time when people were buying games because of the graphics. Still, this game is really fun once you get used to those quirks, and definitely worth a play if you like fast-paced first or third-person shooters, and don't mind having a somewhat annoying and pointless announcer chiming in every minute or two. Now, if you've got a PlayStation, then that's probably the easiest way to obtain and play the game if you want to try it for yourself, but the DOS version is also a viable option, if you can find a copy. In terms of setting this up in DOSBox, all you have to do is leave cycle set to auto and you're good to go. However, if you want to use the game's joystick support to get some analog control going for the movement, you're probably also going to want to turn off button wraps so that you can assign buttons other than just the first 4, and give yourself a pair of sliding and weapon select buttons while you're at it. The internal joystick support is very rudimentary, and I don't recommend using it without something decent, or without using DOSBox for that matter. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next Saturday for ADG Pro, we're finally going to take a look at some cheat codes. Because hey, when it comes down to it, nearly all of us are playing these games to have fun, and if that means having to use some codes because the game's too difficult for one's skill level, or because we're just trying to see how much we can break it, and not because we're trying to screw over other people online, then it's good to know what those codes are. Actually, before we go, Assault Rigs here has a couple codes for all items and invulnerability. But I was looking through the executable file to see if these codes were listed as plain text or not, which they are, but I discovered there's actually a mysterious third code in there. I have no idea what it does because inputting it doesn't seem to work, so if anyone has any idea what this code does or how to hack the game to get it working, it'd be really neat to uncover some long-lost cheat code for this game. Or heck, it might even be multiplayer only, which would be kind of weird. But in any case, we'll be taking a look at the codes for 2 different games next Saturday, so be sure to stay tuned for it. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small random selection of you all.